Hello, puppies and kittens. Once again, well, this time I'm with Bart Ehrman, who the renowned New Testament scholar, and we're going to make an announcement at the end of this video. But before we get to that, I want to open by saying that a decade or so ago, I took a college course on the history of comparative world religions that was based on your collective works. So I'm very excited to finally get to talk to you today. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. What college was this?
Oh, this was a community college here in Dallas.
Cool.
Rich.
Okay.
Yeah. And the professor would be beside himself if I mentioned his name. So Mark Hanshaw was my professor, and it was a very good class.
Lovely. Great.
All right. So I wanted to ask you about this Jesus character, because not everyone has the same impression. And I recently read that a number of rabbis and imams had agreed that Jews and Muslims worship the same God. Let's call him Jehovah, while the Christians worship a different God, being the deified Jesus, whom the Jews see as a human heretic and the Muslims see as a prophet, but with magic powers. So they distinguish Jesus from God, where Christians tend to conflate Jesus with God, worshiping the Son exclusively and failing, it seems, to even acknowledge the Father. And I have a number of examples of this that we can get into later if you want. I was raised not as a Trinitarian Christian, I was raised binitarian. The Mormon prophet said that he had witnessed Jehovah and Jesus standing side by side. So I never got the impression growing up that Jesus had ever declared himself to be, the personification of God made flesh. He was not the same essence of God. Instead, I always noticed that Jesus always only ever said that God was someone else, somewhere else, who knew things Jesus didn't know and could do things Jesus didn't do. So what would be your take on that, sir?
So I think it's a hugely complicated issue because there's not a standard Jewish, Muslim, or Christian view. I'd say there's more standardization in Islam on issues like this than there are in Judaism and Christianity. A number of Jews these days think of Jesus as an important Jewish teacher whose teachings were taken wrongly by his followers, who developed a religion that he had no plans of starting, that he wasn't particularly a heretic. He just was misunderstood by his own followers. Christians, I'd say, have just a huge range of views. And so there isn't, the standard view that came about is, of course, what you were saying, the Trinity, which does say that Christ and God the Father and the Holy Spirit are all equal and of the same substance. And they're literally equal. They're not, it's not that one is greater than the other. Tradition, I'd say Christianity hasn't said that. Christianity has, Christians haven't said that, I should say. Most Christians think that God is God and Jesus is like the Son of God, and that it's kind of a lesser figure. But the theology of the Trinity is that they're equal.
I've heard arguments from believers telling me that when, for example, when God shows himself to Moses, when he turns his head or shows his backside or whatever, when he sits with Abraham and eats, that any of these physical incarnations of God are Jesus.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah. Rabbis are not thinking that, I'm sure.
No, rabbis are not thinking that. No, when Christians came to think that Jesus was a divine being, which I think it happened soon after they started believing that he got raised from the dead. As soon as they thought he got raised from the dead, their thought was not that he had like a near-death experience. Their thought was that he was taken up to heaven to live with God. And the original thought was that he had been a human being that was so righteous that God made him a divine being. But over time, when people started thinking he's a divine being, then they started developing this idea of an incarnation, that he actually existed before, and then he came down as a human and then went back up. Once they thought that, then they thought, okay, so God comes in different forms, and if anything's in a human form, that would be Jesus. And so that's how they start reading it back into the Old Testament, even though in the Old Testament, this is definitely not Jesus. This is some kind of manifestation of God.
Well, I've argued with believers, and rarely do I get to discuss this with a biblical scholar. What I'm arguing with believers who have other aspects of this wide range of views, where I've compared, for example, the Hindu Trimurti, where you have these three characters, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu, and they're all different, distinct individuals with their own wives, their own lives, and so forth. but they serve equally in a Godhead. So I've asked people, is this what the Trinity is? Is it like the Trimurti? No, no, no. Jesus impregnated Mary with himself and
Really?
that can't be the scholarly perspective, but that's what a lot of Christians.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I know. And a lot of, there's been this move in evangelical Christianity that I really wasn't aware of back when I was an evangelical, people saying that Jesus himself is Yahweh, which I think is bonkers. Not theologically bonkers. I'm not taking a religious stand. I'm not a believer at all, but I think historically that's just nuts. There's no way that the early Christians thought that Jesus was Yahweh. They thought that he was the Son of God, and that Yahweh's the one who, no, Yahweh's the Father. He's not the Son. And so, but I know people come up with this thing. If Jesus is God, then X, Y, and Z. And it's, they can think that if they want, obviously, but it's not what the Bible's talking about. So.
Yeah, well, I've had arguments with Trinitarians. If you're not considering that it's like the Trimurti, that these are not three distinct characters, that they serve in the same Godhead, that they are all different aspects of the same being, then Jesus, and how would it be possible for Jesus to not know things that God knows? If God is, as so many evangelicals have told me, that Jesus is he's like an avatar in a video game. He's like the character God plays in our world.
Yeah. That was a popular view in the second Christian century, and it was one of the first views as declared a Christian heresy. The idea that there's only one person who's manifest in three different modes of existence. Like I'm a father, and I'm a son, and I'm a brother. There's just one of me, but I have these different kind of relationships, depending, and that God is like that. He's Father, Son, and Spirit. Going back to the second century, you have authors like Irenaeus and especially Tertullian. Tertullian is this Orthodox church father that just shows that just doesn't work, because when Jesus is praying, he ain't talking to himself. and Tertullian has this long, complicated argument, but it comes to be declared a heresy by the early 3rd century. And now people picked up again, not realizing that it can't work that way. It has to be three separate and distinct individuals, even if they are equal in substance.
But the people that I'm addressing kind of covertly right now, the people that have made these arguments with me, when they tell me that when Jesus said that I and the Father are one, he is saying that he is God, that he's the physical manifestation of God.
No. We're not saying, go ahead.
But doesn't Jesus also say that he prays to God? He's not praying to himself. He's praying to somebody else, saying, can my disciples also be one with you just as I am one with you? Can they be one with us? So he's asking someone else. So what that means is that he's not one with God in the way that these Christians, are describing.
You're absolutely right. And the Gospel of John supports that up and down the line, the Gospel they're quoting. When he says, I and the Father are one, he doesn't say, I and the Father am one. It's a plural verb. Sometimes it really does matter what the word is. For those of you who are familiar with Bill Clinton politics, it matters that it's plural. And throughout the gospel, he talks about the Father. At one place in the Gospel of John, he says the Father is greater than I. Well, then how are they the same?
Yeah. So, how can they be equal if you're greater? That's another mathematical.
Well, that's another problem. But when he says that, when the later idea that they were equal, being equal is not the same as being identical.
True.
Being equal is not the same as being identical. You and I might be equal before the law, but it doesn't mean we're identical.
So the people that I'm talking about, this particular subset that I'm talking about, tend to think that Jehovah is just another name for Jesus, and that they don't seem to acknowledge that there is another God, the greater God, the Father God, that they just see this one entity.
Do they consider themselves Trinitarians?
And yet they do, some of them.
Well, they're not.
Unfortunately, most of the people that I'm talking to know so little about theology.
Well, that's it. If you don't know much, then you can say anything you want and think you're right. But you can think that this is the standard Christian view. But you have to learn something to know what the standard Christian view is, and this is not that.
Yeah. So the counter argument I always use is when Jesus is giving the prayer, "Take this cup away from me, not because I will it, but because you will it." Well, that kind of means
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
person.
My will is not your will. Yeah, I know.
So you have a seminar coming up, and
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you talk about that for just a couple minutes. If you
Yeah,
would.
well, so the issue in this is I am presupposing that that the historical Jesus, well, no, I'm not presupposing anything, actually. I'm looking into this question. My question, it's related to what we're talking about. My question is, did Jesus think he was God? Now, I don't mean it in the way that your readers are talking about, because although it works for that as well. But what I'm imagining is that Jesus, as a first century Jew, did believe in a God. And Christians have always said from the beginning, the followers of Jesus said that he was God in some sense. They had different ways of understanding how he was God, but in some way, he himself was God. And my question is, did Jesus think that? And how would you know? And so as a biblical scholar, I'm interested in how you know what Jesus said, and if there's any way to figure out what he really said and what he really might have thought. And so that's what this seminar is going to be on. It's going to be on whether Jesus thought he was God.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Just to let everybody know, that'll be a 90-minute seminar on Did Jesus Call Himself God? A closer look at the evidence. And you can see it live on November 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for $9.95 if you click the link in the description. And that price includes getting a recording afterward. And it'll cost $14.95 for the website for the recording afterwards for those who don't sign up for the live event. Dr. Ehrman, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Wish we could do it again.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I hope so. Okay, good. I hope people can come to this webinar. It's going to be really interesting, I think. So, all right, great. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.